Hi, and welcome to the Bookkeepers Podcast. I'm Zoe Whitman. I'm here with Joe Wood, and we're joined by Sam Conniff, who is the author of Be More Pirate and the creator of Uncertainty Experts. Hi, Sam. How are you?
Hello, Zoe. Hello, Joe, and hello, everyone listening. I'm actually wonderful. Thanks very much. Which feels pretty good to be able to answer so honestly and so emphatically.
Oh, I love that. Well, we came across you at ZeroCon. Do you know what? I've actually got a copy of Be More Pirate at home. So although I was thinking I really should have done my homework and read it, so I'm super fresh, but you'll be able to tell us all about that. Do you want to start by telling us a bit about your background, Sam, and what you do?
Yeah, and don't worry about the book. One of my wife's favourite jokes is that she's never finished it. So which is probably a good thing because the beginning's definitely better than the end. What do I do? I have run my own businesses since I was a teenager, and I'm now definitely not a teenager. So I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur, but I've always been interested in businesses with a purpose. So I ran a big social enterprise helping young people. I ran a big training program across Africa, giving digital skills to young people. I run a big program that came out of the Olympic Games for 10 years, giving access to space in various communities all over the country. And as a result of all of that, I got a bit frustrated about change and social change, particularly. There's a lot of talk and actually it's very hard to do. And I think as many businesses have embraced the ideas of purpose, that becomes a bit vague, opaque, and not very accountable. And so I wrote a book about change and why change is so necessary and where it often goes wrong. And because I was so hacked off with so much, BS that's talked about this kind of thing and how important and meaningful it is, I wrote something that was relatively radical. And I took my inspiration from the true history of Golden Age pirates, which very few people know. And that became, to everybody's surprise, mostly my own, this kind of best-selling book all around the world that millions of people have embraced, and it's led to change in organizations far and wide, far beyond anything I would have ever expected.
Amazing. So, Sam, in a nutshell, how do we be more pirate, and what are the benefits that are there of copying pirates and their ways?
Yeah, well, it comes down to the idea of the rules, and by inverted commas. And I'll specify this because I'm sure we're listening to an audience who have a perspective on the rules, being diligent finance professionals. It's our job to enforce the rules, right? And certainly the bookkeepers and FDs I've had throughout my life have protected me many times from getting in trouble that was avoidable and unnecessary. But there's another kind of rules. And in fact, if we look up the definition in the dictionary, it's not talking about legislative frameworks that are there to protect us. It's talking about the implicit norms that govern conduct and behavior. And it's the stories that we walk around telling ourselves. It's the reason that you don't speak up, even though when you know you've got the right question or the right answer. It's the stuff that holds us back. It's the reason that we don't speak up on the matters that are important to us inside, and we feel really uncomfortable and we wish we'd said what we could have said in the moment, and then we're walking around for 2 weeks trying desperately to unpick it. It's that space. The stuff that we don't speak up to then costs us time, money, energy, stress to catch up on. And the reason that pirates represent this, rather than the kind of cartoon and Disney-esque idea that we've got of these murderous rascals who love fancy dress, 300 years ago exactly, our generation, kind of the millennials of the 17th century, really frustrated at a very unfair society that had just got through this major pandemic, that had this really messed up, very unfair, very unorganized way of being. There was all these international conflicts. No one really knew which way was up or down. A whole generation were locked out of a potential future. It had lots of similarities with right now. And they took to these new forms of society on ships. And they had a fair pay structure that had never been seen before, where everybody had a equitable stake of whatever the profit margin was. I mean, the stolen booty, let's be honest, but nonetheless, it was a transparent pay structure similar to what was recommended in 2009 after the financial collapse. They had a decision-making structure that was really egalitarian. So no matter what color, ethnicity, background, or gender you were, and pirate ships had some of the most diverse, well, probably with only examples of diverse communities, because women didn't have equal leadership anywhere in any society. And certainly, this is the middle of the international slave trade. So slaves being released was very, unusual or punishable on board pirate ships, as were the relationships that they not only tolerated but celebrated, because you could have gay marriage on a pirate ship that was so sophisticated it had an inheritance clause. I mean, I could go on, right? There were so many really interesting ideas that came out of these social groups that came as a result of them rejecting the unfair, inverted commas, rules of society. And so I feel like it's a really interesting set of role models for a time when there is so much unfairness, when there is so much unsustainable behavior, when we know that some of the business models of the last 50 years have kind of run out of steam. And it feels really frustrating because we carry on operating in ways that we know aren't good for us. And yet it feels really hard or scary or difficult to genuinely try new things. And so here's a set of people that we think we know, that we're kind of fond of, that we let our kids dress up as. You know, they have a place in our hearts. And yet behind the scenes, they actually have a really important role. And I would argue on the long arc of the history of the British working class and everything that they've done for social innovation around the world, from inspiring the trade union movement to the cooperative movement to the suffragettes, pirates exist squarely there. But it's a story that hasn't been told until now.
Oh my gosh, I love this. Do you know what you're saying there? There are so many parallels with how Jo, I know Jo's reading my mind, I can see her nodding. There are so many parallels with the way we're seeing bookkeepers leave a traditional industry of accounting. Or okay, let's not just say bookkeepers, because we know there are lots of accountants in our community as well. They have become disillusioned with the traditional structure of the industry. And they've found, particularly with the pandemic a few years ago, we all learned how to work from home. We all learned how to work flexibly. And now we're going back to working 9 to 5 in the office again. And we're speaking to more and more people who are starting. I don't know if you agree, Jo, but like I feel like the trend is like suddenly there's this huge rush of people. It's always been a profession, like self-employed bookkeeping has always been a thing when you are a parent. It's like a flexible kind of work. You can make work around your kids. But it's like even more so now, it is possible for this to happen. And I think we're just seeing people so frustrated and they're looking for like a new way. And it is like the rules are changing. We're looking for like a new way to work. And like, what does the new future look like? Why can't everything sort of keep up? I don't know.
I think, like you said, it was very much like, when I started, it was because I was 21 and had a baby and I had an accounting background. I thought, I'll do this from home. This is something I can do. And people have said to me, it's a really good profession for mums. But now it's not just about that flexibility as a parent. We're getting people going, I want to be a digital nomad. I want to travel the world. I want to have a laptop and I want to be a professional and seen as a professional. And it's different. It's not a choice because of compromise. It's a choice for freedom. And that's a change that we're definitely seeing.
I really like that, and yes, well, then it totally will speak to the heart of it, and I think that's really good because it challenges me. I thought I was writing the book for my fellow entrepreneurs and particularly social entrepreneurs, people who'd be frustrated, but they've been out there on the edges trying to create change because that's what I've been trying to do for so long. And then I was challenged by that wisely. And someone pointed out that most people, aren't doing that. They're just trying to make ends meet, right? And they're trying to conform to the, we think, or we're told creativity is the thing that is the most important skill. In fact, the World Economic Foundation published something on this, that creativity is the most important skill for the coming times. But most of us, whether we've been employed or whether we're just trying to make ends meet or do our own thing, it feels like conformity is the way that we get rewarded. Conformity is the way that we get promoted. And there's this dichotomy between creativity and conformity. We're told one thing, but we definitely feel like, we're told we should stand out, but we definitely feel like we ought to fit in. And so then I started really thinking about Be More Pirate as something for people in organizations or trying to do their own thing, but this, rather than being for all the mavericks who are already speaking out, for the people who maybe find that a bit more difficult. And I think that's why it struck such a nerve for the people who work in the Navy in large organizations or who are fitting into an industry. And then you suddenly realize how many people are walking around behind a very thin curtain or veil of limiting beliefs, of things that we think we've been told, of these stories and patterns and narratives that we all pick up and take around with us. And then at the same time, we're so close, we're just an arm's reach away from the stuff that we really want to do. And the gap in between, when you finally get a chance to push through it and you realize that the rules, in inverted commas, are very often paper thin. the stuff that we've heard or read or been told or perceive or think is the way that others want us to behave. And every now and then, and yeah, that's not the same for everyone, because there are limiting factors to society, and depending on your age, stage, life, class, culture, gender, background, right, some of this stuff will be much more risky than it is for me as a middle class white man with some privilege. So I say that cautiously, but subjectively, when we do challenge the beliefs that we walk around with that hold us back, it's very rare that rule breaking in the way that I'm talking about it makes us feel guilty or shameful or anything that we might associate with a term rule. Normally, it makes us feel liberated and a bit fucking free and in control of what we, oh, right, great. To your exact point, I really like that reframing of it, rather than something that controls you. It's something that actually liberates you, and that it's a skill and an industry that provides that. So yeah, then I think we are really, really speaking to the same feeling, the same spirit.
Yeah. Of changing. It's change, isn't it? And when we met, when you were at XeroCon, and I feel like I met you, but you didn't know that. You were there talking about uncertainty, which is something that I think, because we're such black and white thinkers, I think a very stereotypical view of the profession, but I think we do like to fit into boxes and know what things look like. So the idea of any kind of change or bending the rules or the norms of the way this industry operates feels really difficult. And we're also in this really challenging environment. I mean, I feel like it's been like 20 years of challenging environment now, but there's an election about to happen, the economy's up and down. We're really struggling, I think, with uncertainty, and the business owners that we work with are finding it to be a difficult environment economically, as well as everything else going on. So why do we struggle with uncertainty? I think I've just nailed it. But why do humans find that so hard?
Well, so you mentioned change, and I'll just add something to that. So I had to write a second book after Be More Pirate's initial success, because I was so taken aback by how people are taking it on, and I really wanted to understand it better, because it felt so far away from what I'd originally set out to do. And in over 100 different interviews with organizations large and small, people who adopted it, it wasn't just change, but the word that came out more than anything else was permission. And that was really the thing. By being more pirate, typically people are just giving themselves permission. And because there's something fun or a bit risky or a bit adventurous or sexy or goodness knows what, different people interpret pirates in different ways, but it enabled people to give themselves permission, or enabled teams. Or when a leader gave their team a book and said, right, guys, be more pirate, what they're actually saying was, give yourselves permission in a way that you haven't been able to do. And it's that which becomes really liberating. And I think it's why we're all attracted towards stories of pirates or Robin Hood or whatever, because we, and this audience particularly, will know, like, bloody hell, like, the bureaucracy of life can really trip you up at times, can't it? And it feels suffocating. And who doesn't want to, every now and then, with a bit of swagger, put a cutlass through the red tape? Like, so it's that promise. But then the link to uncertainty. When we do give ourselves permission, when we step off the edge of the map of again, the rules in inverted commas, and there is this distinction, we've got to be clear. There's regulations. So lots of your listeners will be part of membership organizations or have professional qualifications, and there are regulations there to protect this industry and why people should have good professional standing and why we need those. But rules, the way I perceive them, are very different. As the stories we tell, the habits we take forward, the stuff that we grew up with, or the kind of image that we place. We've done it about 7 times already. Like all of the stereotypes of bookkeepers, we're like reinforcing again and again, and people are listening, going, "I'm not right-brained, I'm not black and white." And the need for creativity in this industry is absolutely huge, and God knows how much I've benefited from the bookkeepers I've worked with, finding creative solutions to what could have been treated as black and white problems. So when we do step off the edges of the map into the unknown and give ourselves permission, it then triggers a feeling of uncertainty. And the reason why humans dislike uncertainty, and they do dislike uncertainty, the unknown is seen as the fundamental human fear. Right back in our earliest days, 300,000 years ago, we needed shelter, sustenance, social groups, and survival generally. And the first 3 have got easier, but the threat response of survival, like an animal or a predator has come onto the horizon, that threat response is now triggered by news headlines or a difficult day or a client serving notice, or a member of staff saying they have to leave, or someone not coming in, or there's a multiple set of things, but they release exactly the same set of chemicals. It's the unknown. Oh my God, it's a threat. I'm going to need to respond. And often it is. If you're running your own business, losing a client, a member of team, it's an existential threat. So it triggers the same set of responses. So we are chemically wired to have a very uncomfortable set of hormones that go into our body, cortisol, adrenaline, and others, in moments of uncertainty. And it's the classic fight and flight response, and it's there to make us stronger and faster. And it has multiple benefits. The fight and flight response makes us more adaptive. It makes us, it optimizes our brain for new information. It allows us to lay down new neural pathways. So it occurs neuroplasticity, the ability to learn new habits and behaviors. But over time, we've just allowed the story of uncertainty to be solely negative. But the truth is, the history, science, and actually everyone listening has lived experience, tells us that uncertainty is typically good for us. So it might feel awful, but when we look back, I would bet that the defining moments of your life, the stories that you tell when you're drunk, the encounters that turn up in your wedding speech, those moments that we will remember, there's probably a relationship with a degree of unpredictability or risk or taking a bit of a chance. The most predictable moments are rarely the most favorable moments when we look back over our lives. So we know that there's something in there, right, that brings out the best of us. And so how do we get over those chemical responses? How do we not allow the fear response to limit us, but to liberate us? That's the kind of the key of the work that I've been doing around uncertainty.
I suppose it's, we talk about, uncertainty with regards to becoming self-employed. People assume that that's risky, especially if you've been brought up in a traditional, working class family, and everyone goes and gets a job and has a paycheck. And if you step outside that norm, everybody looks at you because you are there's fear there. There's fear, not your own, just you've got your own fear, but you tend to have the fear of your whole family and your friendship group. They're like, what are you doing? Why would you take this risk? And it was only when, I've started multiple businesses, but actually when I realized I was never going to work for anyone else again was when I was made redundant and realized that actually there was no certainty ever in employment, because it's down to somebody else. I'd done, and also what triggered it was I'd done nothing wrong. I'd helped that business make £1 million net profit over 2 years. I'd done everything I'd promised to do. They'd taken me on holiday. They'd promised me shares. And then one day, I don't even know now what happened. And I'll never know. All I know is that I learned that I can be certain in my own ability to make, income for my family. And even though there's always going to be uncertainty in business and everything, I know I've always got my back. So I've had to kind of have my own back and be certain in myself. But it is a confidence journey, becoming more certain in yourself. So and people think, even showing up now, like doing that, people say to Zoe, how do you do that every week? The truth is, I don't know how many episodes we're on, 280 or something. I don't know. We didn't know what we were doing first time. I've seen some of the first couple of episodes. They were horrific. And I don't even know if they're on. I don't compare myself to anyone else. We are just having a chat. And funny enough, thousands of people download and watch it. And we're just going, we're not certain it's good. We were never certain it was going to work, but we gave it a go, because exactly what you said about community, we needed that. And that's what I craved when I started a business. I need other people, but there was nobody. So we had to create it. So Zoe and I have become industry disruptors in the fact that who thinks bookkeepers can have a podcast? Like, in the accountancy space that we're in, it's accountants first and bookkeepers stay in your box and we will give you work, and don't try and, don't try and think you're the same as us. That's why I went into bookkeeping, because all the men in the office said, that's what mums do. If you're going to have a baby, you go and be a bookkeeper. So I was set up with that mindset that I'm meant to play small and don't ask questions, just do as you're told, pass your exams, the accountant will give you work, the accountant will liaise with the client, you just stay in your box. And that's what I did until I was then made redundant. I was like, this has got to change. I wasn't certain at that point, but I think something big sometimes has to happen for you to make that shift. How do we do that how do we build confidence in ourselves and push ourselves into uncertainty?
Probably at like the most difficult time. Yeah, probably at the most difficult time. How do you push yourself into an uncertain environment when everything seems against you?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and you framed it brilliantly, because that is a very common, I think there are societal norms that tell us based on our age we should act a certain way, on our background, on our, there's no one listening whatsoever, I would be fairly sure, whose background in some way, shape or form, in a mirroring way to yours, being a mum being told that here's the story that you should conform to. Like, we all do. I've been thinking about this a lot. I've been doing quite a bit of work around kind of male allyship and masculinity, and like, by Jove, like the levels of depression and suicide amongst middle-aged men are so incredible. But it's all primarily informed by these stories that are told from an early age, and then you go out. So everyone has this story that they're told, and this is my interest in the rules and how do we challenge and change these things, because when you do challenge this, it feels very difficult. Even though you were ostensibly right, of course you should challenge that. Of course they weren't correct. It feels very hard to go against a dominant narrative that you've heard for so long. And that hardness, that difficulty, is what's known as dissonance. When there are two competing ideas, it's as if you have two parents who have fallen out and you're a child. You can't have two primary attachments both telling you the right thing. So suddenly the brain is split and we fall into dissonance. And we all know what that feels like. You don't know what to do and you actually can't make up your mind, and then you start to feel stuck. That's the beginning of burnout. It can be the beginning of anxiety. It's a very difficult place to find yourself in. What's really going on is that deep in our brains work, and they're widely accepted. The most commonly accepted model of the brain's functioning process is called the predictive brain, or the Bayesian brain. And it's simply put that the brain exists and it's making hundreds of predictions every second about what's going to happen next. And when it's correct, it gets a small chemical called dopamine, which is the reward drug, to inform it being accurate. Well done, make that prediction again. And if it's wrong, it gets a negative, a small dose of dissonance. All right, I won't do that again. And so your phrase, playing it small, is perfect, because the brain exists to keep you alive and nothing else. Not to be creative, not to challenge the norms of bookkeeping, not to invent podcasts. That is not in our biology whatsoever, right? Which is why we have to work so hard to push this stuff. The brain just wants to keep us alive, procreate. It's a biological organ in the body. So in the world that we now exist, this happens to us all the time, and we have to push against this, and we have to update our predictive model of the world. Now that is going to mean that we encounter a prediction error. We're going to try more things as much as possible, and each time we get it wrong, the brain's going to have a predictive error. And you have to know the difference between a prediction error, the brain's got it wrong, so it's giving me a bad chemical, and an actual error. Oh crikey, I've made a mistake on my report, right? They're two very different things, but they can feel the same. So am I widening my experience of the world by taking a sensible risk? Yeah, I am, and I'm 200 episodes in, and doesn't that feel good? So I reflect upon that, as hopefully you both do, and you feel incredibly proud that you've created this community who look up to you. Great. So every single time we stretched it, of course we felt uncomfortable, but then you need to reflect on that process, and that's how the brain updates its prediction model of the world. Because if it doesn't, it's just been told I've got it wrong, right? Everyone told me, I felt bad. Yep, okay, I'll get back in my box then. And then we will end up playing it small. In the uncertainty to work to kind of get here, I've had two sides to it, right? There's these stories that I've gone and found, because I know that we typically learn by stories, and very often we need stories that take us outside of our normal space. So I spoke to ex-refugees who are now CEOs, ex-gang leaders who are business leaders, ex-smugglers who are now trauma specialists, people who've been through the justice system or gender transition, people whose experience of life is so uncertain that it's kind of compelling, kind of interesting, but they've gone through this moral arc, right? So we can listen to them. They've been a success in the shadows and in the mainstream light. And then I worked with a specialist laboratory called the Decision Making and Uncertainty Centre, which is part of University College London, so that I could make sure there were some real concepts that backed up these stories. And there's something that strikes me from what you just said that I was told by a smuggler. And it's really interesting. He always wanted to be a smuggler. He's from Glasgow. And as a teenager, he left home to off to go and smuggle. And he had he got a smuggler apprenticeship, which made me, interested to know there was apprenticeships in smuggling. I mean, they definitely have bookkeepers, let's be clear, and good ones too. And then he got imposter syndrome. He got nicked, and then he was with the bigger smugglers. And the technique that he was given is one that anybody can use. And you draw a little figure of yourself, matchstick figure of yourself, and then draw a circle around that. And then you draw another concentric circle around that, and that's your safety zone. So that's the stuff that you're good at. So bookkeeping, or I've got better at writing. And then around that, you draw the third circle. So now you've got a donut, and that's your stretch zone. So in that, you might put starting your own business, or you might have once put starting a podcast. And I would have once put public speaking or conflict conversations. And then on the final outer circle, you put your panic zone. And that's definitely not somewhere we want to be. So that for me would be debt, or, protesting, stuff that might feel like really like that doesn't make me feel comfortable at all. And now you've mapped it out in this very simple and illustrative way. It's upon all of us to not spend too much time in our comfort zone, but know where it is, because we all need to go there. That's where we recharge our batteries. But then regularly, let's say a couple of times a week, to go into our stretch zone, which is what you did when you started doing the podcast. And then a moment comes, and this was his advice, once you've mapped it out once, you just need to map it out and then kind of store it away somewhere. And then make sure you do it again 3 or 4 or 5 months later, certainly within 6 months, knowing that you're regularly going between these zones, but protecting yourself from the panic zone. And what you'll have seen is that the things that were once in your stretch zone now, so podcast is now squarely in your comfort zone, as has public speaking become mine. And I never would have thought that. I used to bloody hate it. I used to, be so terrified of it. And what he's done is a lovely illustrative representation of the predictive model of the world, the predictive brain, because now the brain predicts every single time you get on a call or you invite someone to, now you predict they're probably going to say yes, it's probably going to go well, and you're probably going to have thousands of listens, because that's what's become the norm. So if you were to challenge yourself to now do an international, so whatever it is that pushes it further, that might go in your stretch zone, but the same thing will happen. And so it's just a simple illustration of how the predictive brain works, but how we can do it in a way that's careful and protects us and looks after us, but eventually we go towards the growth that we seek.
Oh, that's interesting, because I know we talk about vision boards with our community, and we do this exercise in our success program, which is our program for bookkeepers. And we start with what do you want the future to look like what's on your vision board? And Joe will tell you, Joe's done this way more than me, because I had to be to get Joe in my brain for me to be able to do that. And you've done vision boards, Joe, haven't you? And then you've gone away and thought that would be so great if I can do that. And then you filed it away and then taken it out and been like, oh, I've done that. And it's almost like it's a different way of representing it. And I know that those things in the panic zone are not the things you're trying to bring into your vision board, but the stretch zone are. And just by even deciding they belong there, you're putting that message to your brain somehow that I'm looking for this.
You absolutely are. We covered this in the Uncertainty Experts in episode 3. It was taught to me by both a neuroscientist and a Buddhist monk. It's a tiny part of the brain in the prefrontal cortex region, known as the reticular activation system, and it's the center of alertness. And it's effectively like the bouncer in a nightclub, or the doorman, the door person, I should say. And it decides who gets in and out, because the brain can only do so much. And it's like cookies on a website. If you have heard a certain song when you get up in the morning and you're feeling like you're going through a breakup or whatever, you feel like you hear that song all the time, but it's just that your brain's become primed to that song. Or if you're thinking of buying a car, you suddenly, I just keep seeing that car everywhere, that's interesting. But you just become primed to that piece of information. And vision boards, when they work well, work in exactly the same way. You're priming your brain towards a piece of information, and so now it's more likely to seize upon that information. So yeah, there's really good science that sits behind vision boards. I'm all for it.
That's amazing. Yeah, and when I have a financial goal, I change my passwords and things to it, so I'm just constantly reminding myself, this is what I want, this is what I want, this is what I want. And then you just manage to get yourself there, because your brain's tuned into it. And this is why we have to tell ourselves, it's like the sat nav. If you don't put in the destination, you're just going to be aimlessly driving around and not knowing where you're going. But you've got to give, some clues. If you don't know, then your brain's not going to help you.
Yeah, exactly. The brain, it's not very good at making massive abstract leaps. So yes, you need to have a clear idea of the destination, but then you also need the steps. You need to constantly be focusing on the steps. The brain likes short leaps. It doesn't like major uncertainties. It likes novel challenges. So one of the uncertainty experts we interviewed is an RAF pilot, and he taught us about something called OODA loops, and that's what he learned as an RAF pilot. He was captured, prisoner of war, and OODA loops is observe, orient, decide, act. Observe, orient, decide, act, and it's how you learn to make decisions when you're traveling incredibly fast in very uncertain situations. And what it's effectively doing is contracting the decisions that you've got to make. So I observe my new situation. I've decided to go out on my own and start a bookkeeping service. I've got a call coming in, so I reorient myself to that. I decide that I'm going to pitch myself as best I can. It went okay, so now I act and I follow up. Now I observe, orient, decide, act. And very often it's the case that we, to in effect limit ourselves. So here's what I want to do, and then I'll quickly try and go to the biggest thing to kind of reinforce these fears that we've got internally that things aren't going to work out, because uncertainty wants us to play safe. So it would rather prove that this was too risky. By contracting those decisions down, make a series of great small decisions, then you're going to end up having a really good, a good bigger decision. It's like the old saying, a good life is just made up of a series of good days. So just try and get through today as best as you can. But this has got a bit more military strategy and science behind it. But it's exactly that, yeah. Be primed where you want to end up, and then make small but bold decisions as much as you can together.
Oh, I love this. I want to know all of the success story. I want to hear about what happened to the smuggler and his apprenticeship and everything. I know there's so much more we could talk about, but Sam, can you tell us a bit more about how people can find out about what you do in the Uncertainty Experts and connect with you and work with you?
Certainly. Well, I will give you some information to put in the show notes, and I'll very happily will work out a discount for the Bookkeepers Podcast community. We run it a couple of times a year as a live cohort. It's a kind of hybrid of documentary and a course, really. We got some backing from Netflix when they saw me do. I did the first pilot of it in lockdown. I built a green screen studio in my kitchen. My kids were helping me, holding up lights and stuff. It was quite a thing. And then we partnered up with Netflix, gave us some backing and some really great production support. So the stories you'll see are brilliantly told, really well run, and you'll lean in, right? Because and as you found, now we can go away with some great advice from a smuggler. You'll get advice from all sorts of interesting people. And then my co-presenter is this wonderful science communicator, cognitive scientist, and she'll explain the stuff that I've done badly here today, like what's going on in our brain and body, how we can turn them into tools for ourselves. And then the show itself asks you a series of questions, and we go through it as a community. So there's some big firms who've been sending teams along. We've had Netflix, Nike, Apple, who else? The NHS, Novartis, Aviva, Lloyds Bank. Some really interesting firms have sent teams along. And then lots of individuals come. We've had lots of entrepreneurs, people going through lots of change in their life. And you do an assessment before and after, and at the very end of it, you'll get a report which will, in about 95% of the cases, show an increase in what's known as your uncertainty tolerance. And there'll be a risk profile, an agility profile, lots of really interesting markers, which will, as shown, improve your ability to step into the unknown, to make a difficult decision, to be a bit more open-minded when rational information falls away. So certainly for everyone who is running their own firm or finds the unknown uncomfortable, it will demonstrably and scientifically help. And then you become part of a really interesting community. We do a monthly webinar about whatever the community votes. So the last one was what it feels like to lose your mojo, and the one before that was career pivots, and the one before that was around relationships. The daily experiences of uncertainty that most people face, because it is something that's very subjective. We ask this again and again: what's keeping you awake at night? And time and again, it's the same four things. The first one is career, the second one is money, the third one is relationships, family and friends, and the fourth one is health. It's never AI, contrary to what we think. It's very rarely is it the climate crisis or global conflict, and that's telling, because it's those are such large uncertainties. It's very hard to get our heads and hearts around as much as we do need to. But when we lie awake at night, the four uncertainties that we all experience are very close to home, and so this is designed as something that will help people deal with those.
Oh, I think that is very much needed in our community. So we'll make sure we share all the details in the show notes. Sam, thank you. We've really loved chatting to you today. Thank you so much for your time. And thanks everyone who's listened today. We'll see you next week for another episode of the podcast. Take care. Bye.
Thank you very much for having me on. Cheers.